So Dave Linthicum's going to give us the skinny on Networld and Interop, that and more on This Week in Cloud Computing. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 58 of This Week in Cloud Computing. I'm your host, Amanda Coulong, and actually joining us in studio today, we have Phil Lieberman of Lieberman Software. How are you?
Hey, Amanda.
Great to have you back. It's been about a year.
Yeah.
So we're gonna chat here with Phil about some security issues that we've been talking about on the show as it relates to Sony and a few other companies like that. But until we get to that, I want to also say hello to my co-host, Dave Linthicum, who I believe is at Networld and Interop. Is that true?
I am in Vegas, down another $500.
Wow. I think you've been in Vegas more than me lately.
Yeah. You should show up. Everybody's asking for you, Amanda.
Oh,
I have a
really?
big egomaniac. They go, "Where's Amanda? How come Amanda didn't make it?" So I started making stuff up. Like I said, you're in a Mexican prison.
I'm here. I'm here. We'll have to make an appearance together somewhere so that will appease fans. How about that?
There you go. Sounds
Next
good to
time
me.
you're in LA, we'll go on a tour. So everybody, before we jump into everything, if you would like to participate with all of this banter with Dave and Phil and I, then join us in the chat room. You can also follow us on Twitter at TweeCloudComp and use the hashtag TWICC so we can follow you there. And make sure that you're checking things out on iTunes. Subscribe to our show there. Give us some recommendations. Tell us what you think about This Week in Cloud Computing. So if you are also interested in sponsoring This Week in Cloud Computing, send an email to sponsor@thisweekend.com. We have all sorts of sponsorship opportunities here and on the network. So there you go. Dave, I would love to start by jumping in with you about what the heck is going on at Networld and Interop. I hear like buzzwords coming out again, something about everybody touting a fabric architecture. Is that something you're hearing? You know, what else is going on there?
Yeah, I think the key thing is architecture. So everybody is talking about fabric, but they're talking about kind of getting down to business with cloud computing in terms of how it's going to work within a business. So I was pleasantly surprised that the hype is down and the banter is down. There was some sniping back and forth. In fact, we have a story about that later on when we talk about news. But overall, everybody is figuring out the value of cloud computing. They're reviewing case studies where cloud computing is going to have value and basically moving it in that direction. I thought that the Cloud Enterprise Show, which occurred on Sunday and Monday, it ended yesterday, was great. And actually, Alistair Kroll, who we've had on the podcast, is running the show. And he did a great job in getting some great content around thought leaders in the space and people who are basically looking to take this stuff to the next level. So what I didn't hear is what I didn't want to hear. I didn't hear about the same old, this is what cloud computing is. What I heard is basically, this is the business case. Ultimately, we're looking to make cloud computing work, and these are the steps to get there. Even the vendor presentations were subdued around the hype and basically talking about case studies and what's working and what's not. So it was kind of a coming together, so to speak. I mean, everybody could have joined hands and sung Kumbaya. In fact, it's still the case, where everybody was arguing and bickering about private cloud versus public cloud. And in fact, I chaired I was a moderator for the false cloud debate, and we had public cloud providers and private cloud providers, and they didn't really duke it out. They kind of agreed as to the value of this stuff and basically how it's going to work and play well together. So this was a matter of people coming together on what cloud computing is, taking it to the next level. And I thought the message was incredibly positive. I was just very taken back by, number one, the quality of the content, the positive message, the lack of hype, and ultimately the fact we're getting down to work with this stuff, which is what we need to do.
Finally getting down to business and getting the work done, huh?
That's right. What do you think about that?
Oh, goodness, I don't know. We got a whole lot of people in interview. Anyway, what about attendance? Has attendance changed? What kind of people are you seeing there in terms of titles and things?
Yeah, it was sold out.
Great.
So attendance was packed, and I don't think there was a seat that wasn't taken. So attendance is primarily a mixture of technology leaders and developers, people that are basically, it's their job to bring cloud computing into their enterprise. So I saw a mix of, there were a lot of vendors there, like there always are in the early stages of this stuff, but I did see a lot of people with a CIO title, director title, people that even have cloud computing on their cards. They're director of cloud computing.
Really? We're starting to see actual titles.
Bill and the Global 2000 company, and they're there to figure out the solution and the strategy where the company needs to go. The other thing to kind of take back is we're still at the very early stages of this. So if you think that it's too late to get in and the party's already started, that's really not the case. People are just getting their strategies together and going out and doing the proof of concept prototype. So it's amazing to me to see that the growth numbers that we've seen around cloud computing are really around people just dipping their toes into cloud computing. So that leads me to that means that in 2 years, we're going to see amazing numbers in this space, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. I think that the geek level, at least at the Cloud Enterprise show that had, was very high just because of the kinds of content we had, and of course they were very critical and I guess looking at all the arguments and looking at the technology in a lot of detail. So it wasn't something that's very accepted. And I got a kick out of reading the Twitter threads. So it was fun watching the speakers and seeing the Twitter thread with the with hashtag interop and how it came flying through on different perceptions of different speakers. So the people who had high level ideas and kind of hypey messages around cloud computing, things that were heard maybe a year or two ago, they did not get positive reviews. People that had innovative ways in thinking about cloud computing, such as the Fabric architecture, really got positive reviews, and we're leading the show in this case. So great show. I'm really glad I'm here, and I'm looking forward to some more bickering and arguing.
Well, we like that. It's always fun. That's a good idea, though, with Twitter. If you want to go back and see what people were saying, then just check out that hashtag interop.
It's almost as good as being there, to be honest with you.
Great, great. Well, I know I will go back and peek and see what people said about you. On that note, let's jump into some news. Top story, Canonical's announced future versions of Ubuntu will be based on the Openstack project. So this is kind of big news because Ubuntu is currently based on Eucalyptus. And while there was no real reason that was given for the switch, they did note that 53 commercial companies have joined the Openstack initiative. Lots of momentum there. So Rackspace and NASA first launched Openstack last year, just a year ago. So the question I want to throw out here, and jump in whoever, why do you think they switched? Do you think it's because of Eucalyptus's reliance on Amazon EC2 APIs? Is it because of Openstack's undeniable momentum? And what will this mean for Eucalyptus, Dave?
Yeah, that's another thing I heard at the show here was Openstack. It's really getting a lot of momentum. Everybody's behind it. VMware is behind it now, and people understand that open source and the ability to basically provide standards may be the direction in which we're going. So if you look at the religious beliefs around Ubuntu and Eucalyptus, it's really the open source belief that ultimately that's where the goodness is in technology. You need to be able to give it away and give away the intellectual property and put it out there in a community of users. And really that's what Openstack's all about. So Openstack's kind of getting a life of its own, which is good to hear. It's not just a Rackspace project anymore, not just a NASA project anymore. People are really who are around the open source stuff, been around there for a long period of time, Red Hat users, Ubuntu users, those sorts of things, basically are driving in this direction. And it's interesting to see that the open source movement has a huge life in the world of cloud computing because there are a lot of analysts that were calling for the death of open source as cloud computing became popular. So it seems that OpenStack is going to be the way to go. Canonical basically is praying to the open source gods right now, and I think OpenStack is their best market right now.
So do you think that Eucalyptus is just going to go by the wayside? Do you think that they'll be absorbed into OpenStack somehow, that they'll work together? What do you think will end up happening?
I hope they're not absorbed in OpenStack. I hope they keep their same code tree. I think they can become part of OpenStack without being absorbed to OpenStack. One of the nice things about the open source world is these guys have a tendency to work and play well together.
Right.
So they maintain their own stacks. They incorporate each other's code. And I think there's no reason why Eucalyptus can't have a life within OpenStack and still maintain its autonomy as well.
Great. Well, we'll have to see what happens there. We've had Eucalyptus on the show before, so maybe we'll go and ask them if they'll come back on.
Get those guys back.
I think we will. Well, I want to pull Phil in for this next story. So we've got Verizon partnering with SAP to bring enterprise apps to mobile devices. This is a big one. So together they're going to bring enterprise CRM to mobile phones and tablets through Verizon's mobile services enablement platform. Verizon recently made a play in the platform as a service arena when it acquired Terramark. And now we're seeing the company move into the application layer. So Verizon's managed mobility upgrades give enterprises, they're claiming, more management, security control for corporate and personal devices, an enterprise application portal that includes user and administrator options, and some new antivirus and firewall capabilities to provide enterprise to edge security. So is this marketing speak? We'll see. Meanwhile, also AT&T has announced plans to invest $1 billion in network-based cloud mobility and network sourcing solutions in 2011. By the way, do they know the year's almost half over? So question here, I'll start with Phil actually. Is Verizon onto something here? Could this be a game changer with the cloud? But more than anything, is this going to give businesses the assurance they need to move the enterprise apps to mobile, or is that a false sense of security?
Well, it's an interesting question, because from the point of view of security, you have to look at the mobile platform itself. Whether you're talking about, let's say, the Android environment, or whether you're talking about the iPad environment, these are inherently not necessarily secure by nature. There has to be something added onto them in order to provide some kind of secure channel or secure control. So the idea of providing some kind of additional layer on top of Android or on top of iPad is not a bad idea. It's actually a very good idea. In fact, we were talking to the Motorola CIO at one of the CIO summits that I went to, and they're talking about the acquisition of a new company to provide additional layers of security on top of the Android platform. The big question, however, is Android being open source and the need or the willingness to split the code path to implement security is a real big question that's coming up right now in a lot of circles. With regard to the so-called open garden versus the closed garden of, say, Apple,
Right.
It's a really big question in terms of how vendors are going to get involved and how the platform providers are going to get involved in this entire issue. So I think as far as SAP, most people are running SAP in a web browser. So the question is really, what has changed here? Is this really any game changer at all? On the other hand, can you really run it on a mobile phone? I don't think so. You probably can get alerts by SMS, but inherently I think there is a question about security and how the security is going to be implemented across at least the PAD platform. In terms of other platforms, in terms of Windows Mobile, things like that, again, it's an open question. I'm not really sure I see the play here.
Dave, what do you have to say?
Hey, it's exactly my answer. I mean, I don't see the play here either. I mean, ultimately, the security aspect of this is really going to open up the market, but it's not a problem that hasn't been solved already with other kinds of mechanisms. So this is more of a marketing spin thing with Verizon, dealing with SAP. And the thing is, we, in the world of cloud, we don't consider SAP to be that big of a deal, but they're one of the biggest companies in the world, and their ability to basically provide their services on multiple platforms via the cloud is really going to be the wave of the future. Their ability to kind of get into some of the new markets they're looking to get into, and they're looking for Verizon to make that happen for them. Who cares? I mean, ultimately, I mean, come on, guys. I mean, the cloud, and we've been running this stuff on mobile devices for years, and you guys really need to put down a strategy as to how you're going to get there. We understand the security aspect of it. Okay, we get it, but where is SAP going to be on these devices? What kind of services are going to be able to provide? And it's not enough just to do a co-press release with Verizon that's going to get you there. We need a cohesive strategy that's written down and a step-by-step vision and roadmap for how you're going to get there. There's SAP users in the millions right now that are waiting for that information. My clients that talk to me all the time, they would love a very cogent strategy in terms of SAP's ability to get them in the cloud and to the mobile computing platforms. This ain't going to do it.
Well, the other thing, too, is Salesforce.com is also working on additional mobile platform capabilities. Right. They do, again, have a web browser which works great. I mean, the big question, I don't really see the announcement as anything either.
There you go.
Salesforce, and then some of the other, NetSuite and some of the other things that basically do what SAP does. If they don't get their act together, it's not going to be a complete stomping, but it's going to be the death of 1,000 cuts from these various cloud players out there. They've been eating their lunch for the last 5 years, and SAP needs to take steps to move in a direction that's much more productive for their end users, or their end users are going to leave.
I'm loving this new curmudgeon Dave that we have appearing on the show recently. It's awesome. Wouldn't you agree, Phil?
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, the thing you mentioned before with regard to Ubuntu and the nature of going to OpenStacks, I think that's great. I think this is the one thing that the platform needs, the cloud platform especially, is this idea of understanding how the security is going to work in this environment, understanding how to do add-ons into the environment. The issue right now is you have Microsoft, you have VMware, which are both in essence closed platforms. This idea of being able to spin up as many instances as you want and really understand what's inside of it, I think is amazing. I think it's really the future of where this is all going.
Quotable quotes here on This Week in Cloud Computing. I love it. Let's talk a little bit about Google. They have finally launched their much anticipated cloud music service yesterday at their annual developer conference. Cleverly named, I have to do this, cleverly named Google Music. It'll start as a digital locker, not unlike the service that Amazon recently launched in March. So you can upload 20K of MP3s from your hard drive, access them from any device that's running Android that's also connected to the net. So joking aside, it does have some intriguing aspects. There's this smart playlist feature that uses machine learning algorithms to analyze the song's audio content and generate recommendations. This is much different from the technology that is used in the Music Genome Project that is behind Pandora or the iTunes Genius playlist. So, you know, we've talked about music in the cloud ad nauseum here on the show. Google's finally jumping into the ring with theirs, you know, after Amazon kind of stuck their neck out there first, saying, hey, this is just a digital locker. Dave, what do you think? Will the automated recommendations be a big enough differentiator? Do they need to throw something else in here, some more bells and whistles? What's up?
Hey, why can't I upload my music to Amazon and upload it to Google and upload it to Apple? And, you know, the price points of these things are either free or not that much. So I'm going to jump on the Google bandwagon and get my music up there and just see how it works. I think the music selection thing will be a differentiator. The ability to basically analyze my taste in music and recommend things and create smart playlists, those sorts of things that Apple does with the Genius service, but really it doesn't work out as well as you think it would. And it is kind of a client-server based thing. It doesn't exist in the cloud. So I'm still filling up my iPhone and filling up my computer with my music services versus what Google's saying, let's just get it off our desktops, off our clients, get it up in the cloud. It's protected, it's backed up. We don't have to worry about security. I could care less if people want to play my Bruce Springsteen up there or not. I'm not going to upload my tax forms up there. But ultimately, this is really the destination of this. We've had, you know, many guests on this show that basically have been moving in this direction, and the big guys are definitely taking over. It's going to be Apple, it's going to be Google, it's going to be Amazon, and I think that people are going to become fond of this fairly quickly because they do know they're running out of space. They want to get a lot more information, a lot more technology, a lot more metadata, a lot more music up into the cloud and be able to download it on these devices. And these things, everybody's carrying these things these days. So I'm loving this, and I'm going to be, as soon as I'm allowed to sign up, I'm going to be the first customer.
Well, don't you think there might be there's another question about pay for play? And that is Amazon is selling the media, so the providers are getting money for it. The question is, are they going to be really happy with Google doing the same thing, or are they going to sue them for, you know, their piece of the action? Essentially saying, I mean, I see that as being a really interesting question. I mean, they seem to be very free and loose with other people's copyrighted material. The fact that they're now hosting it, will they be seen as another BitTorrent? Or would they be seen as a secure provider of, you know, DRM content?
Yeah, we talked about it on this podcast before, and I think that's a legal stand has to be made, and Amazon's going to, I can't remember who's suing, I think someone's suing Amazon right now, and Google's waiting to see how the outcome comes out. But if it's my music and it's on my hard drive, I don't see why I can't put it up in the cloud and play it back to myself. I don't really get that. And I understand why the content providers and the artists and the people who basically manage this stuff are getting wigged out about that. But I don't think they're going to prevail in court. And I think the precedence is going to be that if you own the music, it's your video, it's your content, you paid for it, you can put it on any device you want to, including your computer, including your iPhone, and put it in the cloud. And to me, it logically makes no difference. I understand their argument, but I don't think they have a legal stand, they have a legal stance in that case.
There was one situation where a company came up with a DVD jukebox, and people loading the jukebox would load all of their video, load all their audio in, and then tried to play it out of different rooms, and then they got sued to death for doing so. I mean, how does this really differ in that situation in terms of pushing things up and then pulling things down? I mean, I'm sorry, Apple went ahead and licensed the media. Amazon licensed the media, but here we have a situation where you don't have a licensor who's hosting it. Of course, on your own machine, that's your own protection of, you know, whatever you're going to do in terms of firewalling off things. But in the case of somebody hosting it who isn't participating with RIAA or one of the other producers, then, you know, what's their status?
I think their status is they considered another device, and that's I think the law is going to uphold on that. I'm not familiar with the case you're talking about, but logically speaking, these things basically, my space in the cloud, my space on Dropbox, my space in Amazon, my space in Google belongs to me, just like my device belongs to me. I don't see the difference, and I don't think the judge will as well. We'll see how it comes out in court. I think you bring up some good points, but I think they're going to have to battle it out to free our music to finally stick this stuff up in the cloud, or else we're going to go off and buy more hard drives and devices, and I think we got to get out of doing that.
So is Google allowing you to share this out with your friends?
I haven't seen anything that says that. The basic announcement is just that it's a digital locker for your own music.
So yours
online
and yours
storage
alone.
For your files.
Sure. Yeah, that probably works.
That's the argument too from Amazon's camp in terms of the positioning too as being a digital locker where you can not only upload your music but other files as well to this, you know, online hosted storage.
So suppose your credentials get compromised and everybody else in the world gets access to your locker, or you share your credentials.
That was my next question for you, actually.
I mean, that's a really interesting question. If it gets compromised, then effectively it is being shared out on the internet. In that case, who's liable? Is it Google that's liable? Is it you who's liable? Who's going to pay the tariff for the roadway? And then there's also net neutrality. I mean, how is Google going to be viewed in terms of net neutrality with regard to, again, peering as to who's going to pay for the bandwidth for this?
I think we have to have a separate episode all about this and bring Phil back in. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's lots of legal questions. I mean, he's bringing up a lot of good points that we don't have answers to on this show.
Yeah, we should bring in some
but ultimately, there's going to be precedents in the law, and there's going to be regulations and changes. But this is going to happen whether people want it to or not. It just the momentum is there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this next one, thinking about going back and forth about issues, I want you to fill us in and tell us whether or not you were here for this. HP took a swipe at Cisco on the interop stage. So Dave Donatelli, who's the Executive VP and General Manager of HP's Enterprise Server Storage and Networking Division, say that 10 times fast, used the keynote as an opportunity to lambaste Cisco's incumbency in switching and routing as an impediment to innovation and an opportunity for Cisco to introduce complexity and high cost. Yowzers! Wow, were you there for this, Dave? Fill us in.
Yeah,
I saw that. Does HP have a point?
Yeah, meow, 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 right? Yeah, ultimately, I was thinking as HP was saying that, it was like, okay, number one, it's probably not a good idea to take a shot at your competition in a public forum like that. It just doesn't look good. And the other thing is, win in glass houses, HP. Don't throw stones, because ultimately we've talked a lot about their cloud computing strategy, lack thereof, and the whole leak thing that happened that we talked about last week. And they've been stubbing their toe on cloud pretty much. And what they're doing is they're basically battling Cisco out for infrastructure and looking and Cisco is an impediment to them being taking their stuff to the next level. Cisco probably has been lacking some innovation, and they have been a little costly. But the thing is, so has HP. So I didn't quite understand the shot without the backup of the information. He didn't have much information ultimately to back up that little shot. And by the way, this is going on every once in a while in the conference, where a person would get up there and basically take a shot at a company. I forgot to tell you, the Reddit guys, the first day of the Cloud Enterprise Summit, basically lambasted Amazon. They told the attendees they said we would never, do not put your stuff in Amazon. And this is on the heels of the outage that happened last week. So lots of this stuff was going on, and we're going to see more sniping in the cloud computing space. I thought this was a little unnecessary, and like I said, HP is probably not in a position to start throwing daggers at Cisco right now.
I'd like to see what Valleywag has to say about all of that. Anyway, let's jump along. We've got one more story here. There's a new survey that has come out that says organizations are struggling with how to measure the payoff from cloud computing. Struggling to measure the payoff, huh? Because I thought there were lots of ways to measure the payoff of cloud computing. Anyway, more than 60% of respondents surveyed by the Open Group say their organizations do not currently have a return on investment mechanism in place. So the Open Group surveyed 307 cloud specialists at global organizations ranging in size from fewer than 200 employees or more than 5,000 employees in February and March of this year. So is this really about not understanding the value of the cloud or the ability to translate cloud into a business case? Dave.
Yeah, I think both. I mean, the reality is that people understand that cloud is going to be cheaper and much more effective, but they can't put it into a measurable and quantifiable business case for their leadership. And there's a lot that's been written on the return on investment on cloud computing. I mean, it was the Berkeley papers of a couple of years ago, even chapter 3 of my book, and there's a bunch of other, studies and papers and position papers on the return on investment in cloud computing. The reality is that cloud computing return on investment is going to be customized or specific to the particular business that's leveraging it. And so you really need some good consultants in there to walk someone through the business case of creating things around cloud computing, because obviously cloud computing is not going to have a huge business case if we've already spent millions and millions of dollars on hardware and software infrastructure, and that's sunk costs, and moving to the cloud isn't necessarily going to leverage those resources in an efficient and effective way. So there's many instances where cloud computing may not have the value in those sorts of organizations. So you have to consider the value of cloud, you have to consider what cloud is able to bring to the business, and you have to consider it in the context of the enterprise problem domain. And I think people are confused about that. I noticed that at the conference. In other words, how are you guys figuring the value of cloud? Well, we don't even understand step one, how to figure out the value of cloud. We don't understand when we should use it, when we shouldn't use it. What are the patterns of where cloud is going to have efficiency? What are patterns where cloud is going to get us into trouble? Security, governance, compliance. All these sorts of things are not as well understood within the enterprise as they should be. Everybody's confused, and they really can't create the ROI.
Yeah, it's really confusing to me. I mean, look, you know how much it costs for the electricity. You know how much it costs for the air conditioning. You know how much it costs for the CPUs. You know how much it costs for licensing the software. I don't really see where the problem is understanding the ROI argument. I mean, unless you're not paying any of those things. But I mean, even things like buying electricity up in the Pacific Northwest next to a hydroelectric dam versus, say, in Hawaii or in Puerto Rico, where the electricity is going to cost you a lot more money. I mean, essentially locating to where resources are inexpensive. I mean, that seems to be pretty obvious.
Yeah. Utility.
Yeah, it is. It's obvious, but the thing is, there's certain businesses where you have to consider things in the context of the business. So if you look at the utility nature of cloud computing, the fact of the matter is it's going to have cheaper infrastructure most of the time. That absolutely is going to be consistent from problem domain to problem domain. But the thing is, their ability to use that infrastructure and their ability to kind of drive through the existing investments they've already made in infrastructure, which is the big thing, is really what needs to be considered in the context of all this. And people really don't get that right now. You're not going to go in and sell your CEO on moving everything to Amazon when he just approved a $20 million purchase and a data center rental agreement that goes 5 years. There's some tough questions to be asked around that. A lot of businesses are facing that right now. They've made some sunk cost decisions where cloud computing doesn't really fit in there in any kind of a business context.
Yeah, I agree to some extent. I mean, look, we just bought a $500,000 SAN. And then they tell me, well, gosh, you didn't really buy it. In 3 to 5 years, all the hard disks are going to wear out, and you're going to have to buy another one. And so, the question is, if you're looking at the ROI for cloud computing versus doing it yourself, you really see that these things are not necessarily investments, they're really rentals. And that if you're going to rent space, it may be better on Amazon versus doing it yourself.
It's actually a really good way of looking at it and a very good way of explaining it.
Well, the thing is that we have this mysterious employee called their air conditioning bill that comes in once a year. And this person never shows up, but we get the bill every year for his cost. The same thing is, we talk to other CIOs, and we talk about what their costs are for running data centers. And the thing is that even the electricity bill for running this, depending on where you're at, we happen to be in Los Angeles, which has very good electric prices. But in other places, you could be looking at 20 to 40 cents per kilowatt hour. I was looking at people who are locating data centers in Hawaii, and the cost of electricity there is ridiculous. I mean, if you're looking for where to locate the data center, there are certainly a lot better places to do it. Even moving colos to other location is another way of getting high bandwidth, low cost air conditioning, low cost power. So in essence, it really comes down to hardware. It comes down to utilities. But, there's also the licensing model, too, when you look at the treadmill of what that's going to cost. The fabric issues is really fascinating. The idea of moving your infrastructure into a fabric that lets you move around is great, but now you're talking about rewriting all your applications. That's a tougher one. I think maybe that's really what they're talking about, is the idea of not necessarily moving your infrastructure, but rewriting the way and the methodology of doing everything. I think that's the one part that's really hard to understand the ROI.
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, the infrastructure thing is fairly easy to figure out, but it is the application migration. It's the ability to move your data, the ability to leverage your information to stay within some of the compliance issues you have to deal with. And it's an all-in kind of thing, ultimately, if you're going to leverage the cloud. What is your existing application base, your database, your processes, your services? What about security and governance? And how does that look like in a cloud computing environment? And how much is that going to cost? And it is something that's not very well understood, because I don't think we have a lot of existing patterns with people driving things into the cloud. We're just getting the first generation of stuff in there. So people are looking for use cases. They're looking for architectural transformation into cloud computing and putting a business case around that. And I think your point was valid.
Well, I think it's time for the Storm on Demand man.
Shield Maiden.
Yes?
Ragnarok is upon us once again.
Who's that?
Oh, never mind. Just go with it.
Okay.
Storm on demand. Storm on demand. Storm on demand is an infrastructure as a service, cloud computing platform that is powerful enough to replace dedicated servers. A proprietary cloud platform designed by Liquid Web, one of the largest web hosting providers with over 12 years of experience. It is easier to use and less expensive than Amazon EC2. Features include server setup in minutes, easy scaling, backup and restoration capabilities, and pay-as-you-go utility-style billing. Options include cPanel, Fantastico, Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, fully managed servers, private networking, and swords like this, and little guys that we do not have in this commercial, but it doesn't matter, because this is cooler. Storm on Demand can be found at stormondemand.com, at Storm on Demand. Ragnarok be damned. Storm on Demand. If you do not get Storm on Demand, I will come to your house with my sword and make you get it.
Storm on Demand, folks, at Storm on Demand on Twitter. And these little Storm on Demand men are awesome. You have to have one. If you want one, then send a tweet to us at TweetCloudComp and use the hashtag TWICC, but say that you want a Storm on Demand man, because you can't have mine. Storm on Demand, we love them here at thisweekend.com. Don't you like the little Storm on Demand?
Oh, man. Are you kidding? Got to have that. It's worth coming into the studio just to get one of those.
See, even Phil wants a Storm on Demand man. Anyway.
Maybe two.
Maybe two. No, you can't have mine. These are mine.
What about my friends?
We'll talk after the show.
Okay.
So Phil Lieberman, President and CEO of Lieberman Software, we spoke, about a year ago. It's been a while since we first had you on the show. The show's been going on for a while now. Wow.
I know. Well, I'm here.
I know. So we actually read a statement from you last week as it related to the Sony security breach. Do you want to maybe elaborate a little bit on what you saw unfold there, and from your perspective, really what happened and what went wrong?
Well, that's a really, really amazing case of just incredible incompetence. And I mean, literally, when you end up showing up in front of Congress after a week of getting breached, it really was something. The part that was really amazing about this was to see that they didn't have firewalls. They weren't patching their software. The other part is we're now looking at, I think the latest announcement is they're not looking at going back to a live state till the end of the month. So, it's a funny situation where they really believed that their platform, the PS3, was so secure that they didn't really need to do any pen testing, they didn't really need to do any security, that effectively, because they had hardware in front of their cloud, that was going to protect them. The part that was really bizarre was the part that they had 77 million accounts all in one database, which really begs the question that they are operating in the EU, they are operating in different countries, and all those countries said you had to segment your data. You're not allowed to have it in one ginormous database, yet they did it anyway. And then the fact they didn't have a firewall on there just is incredible. The other thing is the story of what happened with the hacker that they destroyed, and then the blowback where they essentially received the nuclear option in terms of their version or hackers' justice against their infrastructure. I thought that was fascinating also. Yeah. The thing about it that's really amazing is that you really get to see what sort of a culture this particular company has with regard to security. The fact is, just now they've decided that, hey, gosh, maybe we should get a CSO or a chief security officer in our corporation now. Maybe 5, 6 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. Really surprising that they would wait so long to implement these things. But I think, in essence, their problem is that they're both a cloud provider of services. They provide massive multiplayer capabilities. They do software distribution or game distribution. But the other part about it is that they are also dealing with credit cards. They're dealing with personal identity. And I think people were really shocked with the idea that there really was very little in the way of security. There was the question of exfiltration. This is the part that I found amazing, which is essentially the ability to exfiltrate all of those records and them not to notice is just incredible. It's not that systems don't exist to monitor that amount of exfiltration, but Epsilon was another example of another place where all of these email records were being stored, and yet they were all put in a ginormous database. People outsourced it and expected that things were going to be fine, and then discovered that all of their records were compromised. So it really comes down, I think, to culture. The technology exists to stop it, but the idea is that there's always this issue in cloud computing, which is, are we doing this to reduce cost? Are we doing this for operational efficiency? And where does security begin and end in this entire process? I think it's really one of these types of problems. It's their fault, but they never necessarily have the conversation. I feel bad for the people on the Sony network right now, which is what are they going to do? Where is the damage going to be to them? Or is this just going to be a blip for Sony versus something else? And of course, the other question I think bears asking, was this really designed to steal information, or was it really designed to teach Sony a lesson? I mean, I think that
Yeah, a lot of people have been asking that same question, actually, and I'm curious.
I don't think it's really been proven that these records have been compromised and anything evil has happened.
Right.
But, certainly the punishment they gave to the hacker who, cracked into the Sony PlayStation, and then gave out the private key to, access the cryptography and access the ability to update the system. I think that, certainly their retribution was swift and certainly impressive.
Dave, what do you... Go ahead.
No, I have a question. I mean, is this really a cloud? I mean, one of the things I saw in the Reuters thing, Sony hacking may hit cloud computing hard. This is from a May 7th article they did. And they talked about how the data breach basically reflects poorly on cloud computing. And if you look at, Sony's PlayStation network, I really wouldn't consider that a cloud per se, as we would with the Google and the Amazon and the other infrastructure as a service and software as a service providers that are out there. So where do we draw the line between these guys providing very poor security, them getting hacked, and them being called a cloud? I wouldn't consider what they were doing very cloud-like, and I guess I don't understand why they're being kind of pushed into the same category as AWS and Google and Salesforce and the other clouds out there. Can you light me on that?
Yeah, I don't really think you can call it that. It's not really a cloud in the sense of those other service offerings. When you're looking at something like Amazon, you're looking at a general purpose infrastructure that's elastic, Same thing with Azure. It's, again, an elastic infrastructure designed for general purpose. What we're looking at here really is an infrastructure designed for one function and to do one function very well and to scale out. So in essence, maybe it's a question of definition. When we talk about an infrastructure which is massive, that's worldwide, that is scalable, that is replicated, and is designed to never fail, those are characteristics you'll see of a cloud environment. But is it necessarily cloud? I think it's a semantic question. Okay. It's certainly massive, but not necessarily open. There's a lot of infrastructure confusion about that when you look at things like live meeting, or you look at websites, or even if you look at Google. Is Google itself, the search engine, a cloud implementation?
Right.
It's massive, it's replicated, it's fault tolerant, but it's not general purpose, it's a one-off. So I guess you're right in the sense if you look at the PS3 network or the PlayStation network, it's a massive replicated architecture. It has the same characteristics of a cloud infrastructure in that it's elastic, but it's really a one-off. And in fact, that might really be its undoing. When you look at general purpose architectures that are designed for cloud computing, many of them have many of the elements of security that may in fact be missing out of what was done in the PlayStation network.
Interesting.
Other question is, did you hack that network, Phil?
May I like being in the software business much, much better than hacking the network. I'd rather sell software to Sony than to take them down.
Very fair point. So semantics aside, when you look at the cloud in general as it relates to security, you talk about security being a cultural thing too. As companies are migrating to the cloud, what are some of the things from a security standpoint that they absolutely need to consider or think about?
Well, one of the issues that came up with Amazon was the issue of replication and backup. I think the number one thing that the companies have to look at is if that cloud provider fails, what are you going to do? How are you going to back up your data? How are you going to restore it? I think the assumption that they're never going to fail, that they're never going to lose data, is an inaccurate assumption. I think you always have to plan for the worst, hope for the best. So even though it's coming from a large company, Amazon really proved out the idea that you have to be able to restore your data. So I think backup and restoration is your responsibility. The second thing is with regard to the transparency of operation. This is really one big bone I've been picking with these vendors, which is they have SAS 70 as a reporting mechanism for their security, but it's proprietary. You can't read the SAS 70 report unless you sign a non-disclosure. Once you sign the non-disclosure and read the bad news, you can't share it with anybody else. And the same thing is even doing a side-by-side comparison. If I want to compare vendor A versus vendor B, I'd like to see both reports. But the question is, when do they provide this to me? And how comprehensive are they? And am I really in a position to read the SAS 70 report and really understand what I'm reading and be able to compare and contrast to understand what my risks are?
That's a very good point. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, do you think some of the auditing kind of initiatives that have been going on right now, where basically groups are creating audits and they're looking to publish some of these audits out there, are going to take off, and the cloud providers are going to allow these people to come in and examine their infrastructure in terms of security and compliance and reliability, even physical security, and publish them? Because you're right. I mean, we ultimately, unless you're going to do a deal with a particular cloud provider, you're not going to understand any kind of advantages, limitations they have within their infrastructure, because they're not going to allow you to come in and do the audit.
Well, I'd go even further. Today I was talking with Gartner about this issue about being able to even see the event records coming out of your infrastructure. There's a group called cloudaudit.org. They have a program called A6. The idea behind it is that if you're running infrastructure in the cloud, or if you're running or using applications in the cloud, how do you see the audit records that are coming out of those systems? This has been a really gnarly issue, which is even things like Salesforce have a very muddled message about understanding who's been accessing your Salesforce records. Similarly, going to some of the other vendors who are providing application as a service, understanding who's doing what with your records and what's going on, there's a real total lack of transparency in this area. One of the things we've been doing is talking to ISAC and some of the other auditing groups, trying to get them to really put the heat on customers and the vendors to provide some kind of transparency. In this particular case, we're talking about an area called SIEM, which is it's a system that's used for private cloud, and it's used in large infrastructures to monitor what's going on with systems, with databases, with applications, with infrastructure, to understand who's doing what and to be able to pick out problems before they get too bad. I mean, in essence, one of the issues of something like Sony is that you've got a very busy network and you need to be able to see real time what's happening. If something unusual is happening, you need to see those audit records. But if the cloud providers aren't providing it, then what is there to look at? What is there to respond to? So the idea of this A6 group, or the cloud audit group, is really to provide some transparency and open standards for sharing this information.
What about the cloud providers signing up with those guys? Do you think that's going to happen?
I think that's only going to happen if the customers actually put the heat on them and say, we need to see it.
Yeah, how can people, you know, anyone who's looking for these cloud services, how can we put the pressure on
Well,
them?
I'll give you an example of something that's been really interesting, quiet yet noisy at the same time, was the city of Los Angeles move to Google Apps, and some of the blowback having to do with security, having to do with auditability. The gory details haven't been really shared in the public, but I would love to be a fly on the wall to listen to the discussions about how the City of LA is going to be able to monitor what's going on at Google Apps, how their auditor is going to be able to see what's going on at Google Apps, and to get a better understanding of not only what their employees are doing, what third parties are doing, and even what Google is doing internally in order to manage the infrastructure for the City of LA. I think some of these details are probably under NDA, but I think the light of day would be, or very bright light on the actual processes that are going on, would be a major improvement in things. I think it really comes down to the auditor saying to companies, you don't get to move to the cloud until we get to see what the cloud is doing, and until we have the ability to control who has access to our data, as well as to control or to see the audit records of not only application as a service, but other modalities. Another interesting part was, if you're doing infrastructure as a service, we've seen Amazon share those audit records. But in that case, you're really spinning up VMs, and whatever those VMs have, you can get to those audit records. As far as things like fabric-based cloud, I don't see really much in the way of anything coming out in terms of how this is going to be audited.
So really, we need transparency for true due diligence.
Yeah, transparency, but I think there's a lack of understanding from the audit community of how to even audit the cloud. I remember doing this presentation in front of ISACA, asking a group of about 140 auditors, how many of you have read the SAS 70 report? And the answer was 2.
Wow.
And then, but they were scribbling pretty vigorously, going, must add SAS 70 review.
So they're even behind the ball then?
I think they are behind the ball in terms of understanding what their requirements are, what their due diligence is that they need to implement for the customers. Look, it's a money-making deal for them. The better their audit, the better the situation. By the way, even on that Sony issue, I was wondering, who was the auditor on that? Who was the IT auditor, and what did they find? Because, most companies who have to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley, they have auditors who come in usually on a yearly basis or more often who audit the risks that these infrastructures have. I would love to read that IT audit report.
If you could get your hands on that report, then we will feature it on This Week in Cloud Computing. How about that?
I think that would be great. How many of those do I get?
I will actually give you mine.
Oh, wow.
Did you hear that, folks? I will give him my Storm On Demand men if we get that audit report. Those men right there. See? Them. Anyway, well, thank you, Phil. We're about to wrap up, but wonderful points, and thank you for coming back on the show again.
It's my pleasure.
And we will bring you back when you have that report.
Hopefully sooner.
And Dave, thank you for joining us from Vegas at NetWorld and Interop, and hopefully we'll see you in LA again soon.
I'll see you in LA soon.
All right, everybody. And thank all of you for joining us for This Week in Cloud Computing. Our sponsor, Storm On Demand, Little Storm On Demand Men. If you would like to sponsor, send an email to sponsor@thisweekend.com. Ideas for the show, send them to me, Amanda@thisweekend.com. Love to hear from you guys. But be sure to join us again next week. Same cloud time, same cloud channel. I'm your host, Amanda Coulon. Thank you for watching This Week in Cloud Computing.